In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains how you can reach a perfect equilibrium in life.
And it's no simple matter to get your own life together, and then it's no simple matter to get your own life together while you're simultaneously getting your family's life together. And then there's you and your family and your community. And all those things have to be brought into harmony. One of the things that I've been very, very impressed with over the years is Piaget's idea of an equilibrated state. I think that that's the appropriate paradisal vision. Now, what Piaget basically said was that it was possible to set up complex systems so that they were voluntarily self-sustaining. And and voluntarily self-sustaining would mean self-sustaining now. They would mean self-sustaining for you. It would mean self-sustaining for you and the people around you. It would mean self-sustaining for you and the people around you now, next week, next month, the year after that, and then across multiple spans of time. And there's a kind of a harmonious balance that implies that I think you have to build from the bottom up, because it's too damn complicated otherwise. You just don't know what the appropriate next step would be. And the ability to determine what the next step would be requires certain fundamentals. It requires certain fundamental skills that have to be brought to bear on the problem in order to solve the problem. And one of them would be, if you and I, for example, want to sit together and determine how to establish an equilibrated space right here and now, one of the things that we have to do is we have to be able to listen to each other. And we may have to be able to listen to each other in such a way that if I happen to be better at articulating myself than you are, then I have to lend you my skills of articulation to help you understand what you want, so that we can actually discuss how we could mutually obtain our individual goals simultaneously in the same space. It's very complicated, and that would also mean that you have to know what you want. And I think that in order for you to know what you want, you have to know who you are. And if you have to know who you are, that means you also have to know who you are all the way down to the bottom of the demonic side, which is no easy thing to do, because it's bottomlessly terrible. But if you don't take it into account, then what you have is an equilibrated solution that's unstable and naive. And that's not going to be helpful, because the parts of you that you haven't called in to the table, so to speak, are going to rebel and cause all sorts of trouble. And so to some degree that means that you have to make peace with the side of you that's predatory and destructive, in order to bring that element up into the discussion, so that it can be incorporated into the solution that's going to propagate it across time. And you might think these are metaphysical considerations and that they're very abstract, but I can tell you they're not. When you people set up your intimate relationships with one another, your marriages, we'll say for the time being, unless you manage to incorporate the elements of your own psyche that are aggressive and sexually demanding, let's say, you're not going to set up a marriage that is the least bit satisfying or stable. And it isn't obvious at all how monstrous and awful both the husband and the wife have to be across time so that they find each other mutually satisfying. But the idea that you can live as, naive persona together happily over any length of time is completely absurd. It just will not happen, because the parts of you that are deeply animalistic and powerful are going to go off and have their own adventure at times when for you it's going to be the least convenient. So back to the garden. Well, the garden seems to be something like the optimal balance of nature and culture. And so the Genesis story is offering the proposition that the proper environment for human beings is actually partly constructed and partly spontaneous, right? And that is what a garden is like, right? Because a garden does what it wants to do, and it's also the product of billions of years of evolution. But when you're in the garden, you're tending it and shaping it and protecting it and walling it in, so that you get the advantages of the spontaneity that the natural world can produce, along with the intelligent and judicious order that heightened consciousness and attention can bring to the situation. And so the story basically says that the human environment is half constructed and half natural. And that seems to me to be approximately correct. I mean, we are cultural creatures. We're not going back to the jungle. No one wants to. And no wonder, because it's full of snakes and poisonous spiders and you live 30 years and like it's not pleasant. So that isn't us. We're culture and nature at the same time. So then the question is, well, what exactly is the proper garden? So I wrote this: a walled garden is a productive natural place given order by structure. Thus, it is a localized replication of the interplay of chaos and order. The man, who's a kenotic logos, there's this idea in Christianity, it's a very strange idea, because one of the propositions of Christianity was that God became man. And so there's this idea that there's the possibility of direct unity between whatever the divine, whatever the total consciousness of being might be in any individual person. And one of the questions that, of course, particularly the Catholics tortured themselves with as a consequence of that piece of doctrine was, how could God possibly fit himself into the frame of a human being without blowing it into shattered bits? And the basic idea that the Catholics came up with was that God underwent kenosis, which was a kind of emptying. And so he emptied himself to the point where there was only enough left of him that he could fit inside a body without blowing it into pieces. And I think what that means in some sense is that the consciousness that each of us has within us is a reflection of the divine consciousness, but it's scaled down to the point where it can inhabit the sort of framework that we constitute without overwhelming it, without destroying it. And so the idea is that Adam and Eve are these kinds of reduced divine consciousness, and that they inhabit a microcosm of chaos and order. So it's like a localized representation of the entire structure of being. And I think that that's perfectly reasonable, because I do believe that it's perfectly appropriate for each of you to assume that what you inhabit in your own being is a microcosm of the entirety. I mean, what else could it possibly be? Especially if you take seriously the proposition that what being is constructed of is chaos and order. That's what you have in front of you, is chaos and order. And maybe you have just the right amount of it in front of you so that you could bring it into a harmonious relationship. I mean, you better, or there's going to be hell to pay. So it's not like it's optional.